All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for attending this panel discussion this afternoon. We are going to be discussing a call for action that JCPA is sponsoring regarding mass incarceration and mass criminalization in the United States. And our panelists today are going to basically answer two questions. And the first question is, why do we need a value statement? And the second question they're going to answer is, how do they intend to use it in their own work within the communities that they work with? So I want to thank everyone for attending this session today. A copy of the call to action is actually, a link is in the chat box, so feel free to download that link. And then we've identified a couple of the values that are part of this call to action. So my name is Faye Taxman, and I am the Vice Chair of the Criminal Justice Committee with Bruce Turnbull. And we're really pleased to be doing this work with everyone regarding the need to change how our criminal justice system functions in the United States. So I'm going to start off the panel today by asking Rabbi Rachel Gartner to please talk about the call to action, and then also to give us her thoughts. Each of the panelists will have 5 minutes to give their thoughts on the value of having a value statement. And then we're going to open it up to the committee, or all of you who are attending this session. Please go into the Q&A component to raise any questions or comments that you would like to have. And just so you know, later on this afternoon at the conference, the call to action will be unveiled, but you can get a sneak preview through the link that we've provided in the chat box. So, Rabbi Gartner.
Thank you. It's really an honor to sit on this panel. And to sit on this panel by sitting in my living room, it's quite something, actually. But I'm really humbled, humbled very much to be here with you. I remember how I started getting involved in this work myself. I was meeting with Rabbi Jill Jacobs, the ED for TRUA, of course, and she was reporting that at a board meeting, a board meeting of rabbis, I was not on the board then, I'm on the board now. She asked, what issues do you care about? And the issue of mass incarceration, and actually, in fact, particularly of solitary confinement at the time, got all the hands up. And when she came and spoke to me about it, my hands went up in the coffee shop, and she gave me something to do. And just by having that opportunity, it really changed my life, because someone said to me, hey, we're doing this as Jews, and you can be a part of this. And she gave me something to do. So I am delighted to be a part of this group that has been doing this work so much more and longer than I have. And it was asked to, should I read the first paragraph of the value statement?
Yeah, why don't
you?
Yes.
This statement was put together by a group of us. You will be excited to unveil it to you later in its fullness, but here it goes. The beginning is a Jewish call to action, ending mass incarceration and criminalization, the National Jewish Network on Criminal Justice Reform. We, as American Jews, believe in a United States that lives up to its ideals of justice, equity, and dignity for all. We remain committed to actualizing those ideals, which are at the very core of Judaism. We're proud of the American Jewish community's history of fighting for civil rights and an end to racism, but the work is unfinished. So as a rabbi very active in TRUA, you'd ask why we need this value statement, Faye, and I wanted to say, you know, I'm in the business of employing Jewish religious texts and Jewish lived history to articulate values that inspire pursuit of justice. And every time I'm asked to do that, or when I'm moved to do it, I always do so with somewhat of a aching heart, strangely, even though it's my business. Because I believe that at their best, our religious texts affirm and articulate what we already know in our kishkas and our bones by the very nature of being human beings about what is good and true. And why sometimes I always feel like, why do I need to put this in Jewish language? It's so obvious. But what we know in our bones by the virtue of human beings has been warped by alternative versions of reality that are generated and promulgated to justify and sustain some of the worst institutions that we know of slavery and Reconstruction, in this case, Jim Crow and mass incarceration. And so Jewish values, a statement like this, I think is one of among many that recite and repeat and help us reclaim what we know in our bones, that all human beings are inherently dignified. Call it B'Tselem Elohim, call it born with inalienable rights, and that all of us are owed the respect due to us simply from that fact. So in order to counter the noise created by the racist and other hateful narratives that have been put forth, again, to sustain and support systems of injustice, I think we need to do really two things. First is to listen, of course, to the voices most affected and to amplify those voices, and then to put out our own counter narratives that reclaim and remind us of who we are and how we're meant to be for one another in this world. So that's a very meta look at why I think statements like this are powerful and important.
Thank you, Rabbi Gartner. So the next 5 minutes or so, we're going to ask Rabbi Kaplan to give us his perspective on why a call to action based on values, Jewish values, is needed.
So in this statement, in this resolution, is the notion that this is Jewish. And that's really a very important notion that we have to begin to bring into ourselves and bring into the communities around us. That for some reason, the Jewish community, because of many different reasons, have sort of sidestepped some of these issues in the past. They've looked at some of the issues that particularly affect their community as we go through issues like increase in anti-Semitism and other issues within America for the Jewish community and international.
Very hard to hear. You're coming across very scratchy.
Yeah, Rabbi Kaplan, we cannot hear you. No, something happened.
We cannot hear you.
No. No. I'll ask Haya to give us some technical assistance and try and help you, Rabbi Kaplan. Maybe we'll move on to Rabbi Barr next. No, Rabbi Kaplan, we can't hear you.
We cannot hear you.
Yeah. So Rabbi Barr, could you please, answer the question? We'll try and get some help to get Rabbi Kaplan online.
You're completely inaudible.
I am delighted and to be here and to be sharing this important work with the panel and those of you who are joining us for this conversation. I think having a statement is incredibly important as an affirmation of what we value and what we believe, and it serves as a reminder as well of what we stand for. And for me, while sacred texts of Judaism give us insights into what our ancestors were thinking at different times and different moments, I think too, what's more important for me is the history of the Jewish people, how we have experienced life itself as marginalized people at times, outsiders at times, people who have suffered at the hands of those who claim that they represented truth. And we know as well that our people came to America, Jews came to America as a place that represented something very powerful. It was the symbols of America and the words of America and the values of America are intertwined very much with values of Judaism at times. The idea of a country where we have inalienable rights, where there is justice for all. And so giving voice to this talks about what we hope America is and what America can be. The fact is, America hasn't always lived up to its ideals. Even though it expresses them in eloquent language, it has fallen short. And having a statement like this is a chance for us to pause, to reaffirm what we believe, what we know, as Rabbi Gartner said, that we know in our bones, and we know to be true, that people deserve dignity. But sometimes in the chaos of life, we forget most basic elements. We forget what is most essential. And so coming together as a community and writing something and putting down what we value and what we hope is really essential. And that's why, for me, having this value statement is, again, so important. Is there no audio right now?
Yeah, there's audio.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I don't understand Rabbi Lipskar's.
So I'm sorry. I'm sorry to get disrupted.
Yeah.
So this, to me, this statement is about what it means for us as American Jews to believe in what America is about and taking the values that brought us to this country, why our ancestors came here, why some of us came here, to get away from another place that was not safe, was not kind. And as a consequence of this, having this statement now provides us a lens through which we see the country that we want it to be, reminds us of what we need to do and the work that is so important. It also is important because of the fact of what America is.
Help me, I cannot hear anything.
Needs to be worked on. I'm sorry, I'm getting all kinds of...
Yeah, I know. Hiya, since you came in, we're getting all sorts of negative feedback. Can you please log off?
I have no idea.
Hiya, can you close out Rabbi Lipskar? Someone's in his office. So, okay. Sorry, Rabbi Barr.
I'm and if what I'm saying sounds a little disjointed, I apologize.
I know.
That's why a statement is so important, because what a statement does is it draws us back to what we value, because we can get disjointed in our thinking. We can forget what is so important. But having the statement that we can turn to, rely on. And
is anyone else having sound issues?
No.
Can you hear Rabbi Lipskar?
Can you hear me?
No, Rabbi Lipskar is not on yet. But he's frozen.
Can you hear Rabbi Lipskar? Can you just wave if you can hear?
No, we cannot hear him, and he's not on
I don't
yet.
know, there seems to be a problem.
Well, can you please log off? Thank you. So we seem to have lost many of our panelists in our session. So as long as we're down to 2 panelists, I'm just going to ask the 2 of you. So we've all sort of talked about, and this was a comment, that Rabbi Kaplan and I were talking about, was the movie Shared Legacies that was showed last night, provided a picture of what has been, but, and the question, and I think this is what both of you were basically trying to say, is we need clear statements of where we need to go forward. And those clear statements of where we need to go forward should be reflected in our values.
Okay, so you can you hear us now?
Yes, but you're interrupting.
Okay,
Sorry.
you can't hear them, Rabbi. Could somebody speak so we can see if we can hear you?
Hello, we're in the middle of a panel session.
If you can put yourself on mute, Rabbi Lipskar.
Okay.
If you could mute yourself, Rabbi Lipskar, that'd be great. And then we will ask you to unmute at your turn. That would be perfect.
Okay, so I was just, since we've had these technical issues, and I'm sorry to our audience here, I wanted to know if Rabbi Gartner and Rabbi Barr, looking forward, how do you think these value statements can help?
Excuse me. For me, I think for many in the Jewish community, criminal justice reform may not be top of mind issue. That it may be something that they're not thinking about, may not have a connection with. And that's, I think, what the value of this statement is. It reminds us that if we're going to create the country we want, we need to be concerned about all aspects of American society, particularly those that we don't think about. And this gives all of us the opportunity to focus our attention on an area that it is neglected oftentimes and isn't necessarily the one that the Jewish community historically has rushed to be involved in. And it gives all of us as leaders, all of us who are participating in this session, all of us who have, whether we're congregational or organizational leaders, something to turn to and say, look, this is about what we want our country to be, and every aspect of it needs to live up to the ideas and values that we claim to hold. And that, to me, is a very powerful use of this particular statement, and pleased that it's been written and developed.
I would add to that, affirm that, and add, particularly when this issue presents challenges for us, we need to remember how important it is for us. There are times when we need to re-engage around issues with the Black community, issues around mass incarceration, even when they push our buttons, because they are essential to us. And that we have to remember to build coalitions, even if we don't agree on every issue, because that's what it means to be an American doing this work. So I think it's very helpful to have this as a signpost, as totafot, I say be'enecha, right? As something before our eyes that says, remember, we care about this. I also think it reminds us to walk humbly, that we because we care about this issue, we have to do what it takes to accomplish it. And that means listening to those most affected and letting them lead us. Now, of course, there are Jews in the criminal justice system, of course, and sometimes we forget that too. But the communities that are most affected, we have to surround them with strength and support and follow their lead and say, as someone said earlier in the conference, to get to them, you have to go through us first.
So, Faye, I don't know if you can hear me now.
Oh, yes, we can, Rabbi
Okay,
Kaplan.
Tried another computer. Hopefully this one won't not work.
Yeah.
V'ahavta kamocha, the issue of how do we love somebody like we want to be loved ourselves means you got to be there for them. We are always looking for someone to be there for us. And as you come out with a resolution like this, it engenders conversations, it engenders education, it engenders action within fields that we may not have seen as important as it should be. And it also allows us to understand that to folks that we share our society with, that we are intrinsically bound up to, that we need to be there for others as well. If this is a radically important issue of many other communities that we share our neighborhoods with, we share our cities with, or share our country with, then we have to stand up. We have to be part of this process. And we have to make sure that as we begin to take on this issue of systemic racism as well, to know that this is one of the aspects of systemic racism that is really damaging and destroying so many lives. And that if we're going to step into that world of undoing racism in our communities, in our society, that this is a deep, deep step and an important step into that process that will touch almost everything. And by being there, it can change how people think. I know that in New York, the commissioner of the NYPD here recently, we were all very pleased to hear it, recently made the statement that he recognizes that systemic racism has affected deeply the world of policing in New York, the connection to slavery, the connection to all that stuff that happened in history that's affecting the present. Would he have been there? Would he have been as vocal about it had it not been for everyone standing up, even those he may not have thought would have stood up? Well, I think that maybe not. At least I would like to believe maybe not. So by being there, and allowing folks that we have very deep connections to, like the NYPD, and them hearing us full-throated about it, then they're prepared to make statements and make some forward movement and look at systemic change rather than systemic racism. Thank
you, Rabbi Kaplan. I just want to, we're going to turn it over to Rabbi Lipskar. So if you want to unmute yourself, Rabbi, I just want to your point, 20% of the
talk as you wish, or is there a certain order to the process? I don't remember any.
Oh, yes. System, so I was just going to make a point.
I didn't hear Rabbi Barr, so I'm sorry if it didn't. For some reason, the audio did not come through. But I heard Rachel and Bob their presentations. I know in your preamble, you mentioned the fact that if someone saved one life, it's if you have saved an entire world. And it's the single life that is as critical as the whole world. And the whole world is as critical as one life. And as we know, the various philosophical comments, you're next, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We talk about mass incarceration of the reality. In my experience, we've had experience in the criminal justice system since 1981. We started our organization in the chambers of the Honorable Judge Jack Weinstein, a venerable justice person in the world of judicial world and a professor, and talked about many of these factors that we're discussing today. But I believe that one of the things that deal with mass incarceration has nothing to do with the police departments. It has to do with the justice system, because the people that make the decision of putting a person in jail and keeping in jail are not the police, it's the courts. The courts are the ones that have to be addressed in that manner. The prosecution, the area of justice, not only as far as mass incarceration is concerned, but one of a more significant factor, or an equally significant factor, is draconian sentences, where you have people who live in prisons for most of their productive and becoming unproductive lives because they are in prison. A fundamental of Jewish life is the fact that of all the punishments that exist in the Torah, including capital punishment and including corporal punishment, the makos, including financial punishment, including selling a person into servitude to pay his debt, not as punishment, but to pay his debt. There is no such punishment as prison. You ask yourself, why is that? When in the American system, the default is prison. The default punishment is prison. That addresses everything in 3551, which is all the factors that are necessary to address in the sentencing options. And it removed the concept of rehabilitation. And I know that because we work inside the prison system. We work in 400 prisons with approximately 6,000 inmates and their families. So we have a wide experience in that field, and working across the racial divide, so to speak. We work with many organizations that are emphasizing the African-American community, the Latino community, the Jewish community, etc., and work hand in hand with them on multiple levels, and recognize that today we have an opportunity, because of a change in our thought process about criminal justice, not only mass incarceration, which, as you say, addresses in some way the racial issue. We're talking about here the concept of punishment of prison. We're talking about this factor in American life, where America, the freest country in the world, the most democratic country in the world, the most wonderful country in the world, has the highest rate of incarceration of any country in the world. We have more women incarcerated than any other country in the world, including China, Russia, Korea, etc., or Cuba. It's incredible to know how many mothers are there. And then when you talk about draconian sentences, to give you an example of a circumstance that we just were dealing with, and thank God we were successful, is a young single mother. She's now a single mother, divorced her husband, who is a pedophile. She has two children with him. She worked for an organization where the owners of the organization were indicted. She was also indicted. She was their secretary. The owners took a plea agreement and got 5 years. because she felt that she did not do anything wrong. She just followed instructions of the owners. She had nothing to do. She just got a salary. She made no money on it. She went to court and had a trial, and they gave her 20 years. And her two children went back to their father, who was an abusive man, and so forth. And here is a case where she had no money, nobody to talk on her behalf, etc. A single woman in a multiracial marriage. She's Jewish, her husband is not, and so forth. But nonetheless, a circumstance that just falls between the cracks. When you talk about this concept of integrating this with the racial issue, there's two distinct issues here. There's a racial issue that is being dealt with in America today in a wide range of factors. And then there's the criminal justice system that needs a complete redo, a complete remake. The criminal justice system today does not work in terms of society, in terms of cost, taxpayers, ruined families. You cannot imagine, we can give you statistics that we have not published because they're incredible, of the collateral damage that takes place as a result of these draconian sentences. Families fall apart. In the amount of children that repeat criminal activity, the percentage of children who's a parent in prison for a long time compared to the general population is like 8 to 1. For every one person that's incarcerated under circumstances of criminality, there's 8 being incarcerated because they choose that lifestyle, because when their parent is in prison for a long time, society treats them different. We have bar mitzvah many kids that could not get bar mitzvah because their father was in prison and there was no place to get a bar mitzvah for them, etc. I'm just talking from a Jewish perspective. Of course, it crosses the borders of all peoples, of all races, of all religions, etc. But I believe that if this panel is addressing the issue of criminal justice and incarceration, you have to take a deeper look at the factors that are involved in this process. Take a look at what are the negatives, and the negatives outweigh the benefits by a long shot, by a 10 to 1 margin on every single level, including if, I'm not sure how many of you visit prisons on a regular basis, but I've visited pretty much every type of prisons many, many times in the last 40, 39 years, ranging from death rows. I've been present at an execution that a mother asked me to be there because she was the only one there. There was nobody else there to watch her son die. And club feds, like they call them, and every place in between.
Thank you, Rabbi.
The kind of environment that you see there, you are walking into a place where there are walking humans. They're warehousing bodies. They are bodies without spirits. There's no soul. There's no objective. There's no purpose. There's no meaning. There's an emptiness. In most of these tough prisons, you know, in Alcatraz, you have these birds. In most prisons, you don't have birds flying through the place because there's dead space. It's not a normal environment of humanity. People cannot grow in that space, particularly how it's conditioned today and how it's structured today. And I'm talking about across the board in every environment, in every prison. Of course, you have, thank God, the Bureau of Prisons has become a lot more humane, and the people they're hiring have a much better educational background in terms of psychology and humanity, et cetera, but still you have environments where people literally are masters over other human beings in the most crude way, which includes, of course, when we talk about the SHU, which is segregated housing units, these environments where people are put alone. I know a very highly intelligent person who was not guilty of a serious crime, but for whatever reason,
sorry, I'm sorry to cut him off. Can you hear me? So we have a number of questions that are in the Q&A, and because we want to be able to have a dialogue, I guess he can't see that. He's I apologize. So Emma Newberry basically wrote in the Q&R, you know, that Malamis believes that there is no mitzvah greater than redeeming one who is held captive, taken from his family and put in a cage. Why do you think there has been a hesitancy in the Jewish community to engage on this issue? Where does this discomfort come from? So, Rabbi Gartner, can you?
That's a great question. I'm not totally sure I can answer it, though. I want to say something about Maimonides. You know, another teaching that we have is when you send someone to a city of refuge, right? You bring with them their Rav. You bring with them their teacher to teach them Torah. And to me, this speaks to the heart of a little bit of what Rabbi Lipskar was saying. I teach in the DC jails on a regular basis. And to me, this speaks to the idea of restorative justice, rehabilitative justice, the emphasis on tshuva, and that our teachings, another narrative not only is the dignity of human beings, another narrative we have is we work towards reparation, restoration, reentry that heals both the person who has been incarcerated and those of us in their community. So that's another counter narrative that our statement, I think, addresses and reminds us to put in front of us. Another piece I want to say, and I think this maybe speaks to the hesitancy, is, and it also speaks to why it's important to have a document like this. I think, in my experience, I've found one piece of the hesitancy, I know it's only one piece, is a fear of mistakes, making mistakes when we enter into issues across difference, across race, across, I'm sorry, I just had my Pfizer shot, so I can't remember other words. But and that one thing Trua has learned over time is that when we put this core value in front of us as a value, even if we make mistakes, we learn. We've had to revise our materials. We've had to change the way we speak. We've had to learn how to follow and when to lead. And that sometimes we can be afraid, the younger generations are afraid to enter because they don't want to mess it up. And I think having a value that it's so important, we can overcome our mistakes and we're in it for the long haul. Don't think that exactly addressed your question about hesitancy. Maybe other folks have.
So let me give a judgment on the side of mercy. Maybe it hasn't been just hesitancy. Maybe it has been inattention. That we didn't see this as an issue that we needed to weigh in on. We didn't understand it fully. It didn't affect us as much. However, going back to what Rabbi Gartner said, correct. It's resolutions like this. It's leadership in the Jewish community standing up and saying, wait a minute, this is an important issue. We have to be at the center of this issue. And it has to be, by the way, at the center of the Jewish community as well. It can't be on one side or the other. It needs to be across the board. We need to see this as a Jewish issue. And all the statements in here from the sages and from the Gemara and from the Torah all point to that. They all point to that when something is broken in society. We all use the word tikkun olam. Well, this is one of those things that need a tikkun. This is one of these things that need a fixing. And we can't, just say, oh, I'll tikkun this and I'll tikkun that. But here you have something that really broke in our society. And we need to be part of the fixing. Are we going to do all the fixing? No. We have to take the lead from those who are most affected, who are deepest in the trenches on these issues. However, if we are silent, and it says, silence is akin to complicity. If we are silent, then we are allowing things not to be fixed. So a resolution like this makes that statement loud and clear. Mainstream Jewish community, organizations like JCPA and JCRCs and Trua and all the other organizations out there have made this a priority. We're putting energy into this. We're putting time into this. And we're saying that you need to be involved to have that conversation. There'll be education. There'll be ways to get involved. That's why we founded the New York Jewish Coalition on Criminal Justice Reform. That's why we now have 30 synagogues and Jewish organizations involved. That's the reason. We didn't do it 2 years ago. We were wrong. But we're not wrong right now. We're moving in the right direction.
very quickly wanted to add that there are organizations, as you mentioned, JFridge and Trua and other organizations that have been doing this work for quite a while and are ready to continue this work with the broader swath of the Jewish community, eager to help put our experience to work in a broader way.
And there are a number of JCPA organizations or JCRC organizations at the local level that are very active.
It didn't go past anyone that we're meeting today on Pesach Sheni, which the message is everybody's got a second chance.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi.
I'm not
So I
talking
wanted
about the hesitancy. I'm looking at it from a little bit differently. You know, you're talking about a change in incarceration. You're not talking about racial justice right now. That's a different discussion. You're talking about incarceration and the American system of imprisonment. Am I correct about that?
But I don't see them personally. I don't see them as separate.
If I'm correct about that, then that's an issue that has its own environment. It has its own issues, its own problems, and when addressed from a wider perspective, has a better chance of being successful, because you take it into a wider perspective where the entire community, everybody's being affected. There is a larger segment proportionately of African American people in prison than others, based on their numbers, et cetera, whatever the case is. And I think that that's something that needs to be addressed significantly and carefully. But another factor that you need to deal with in terms of that whole process, incarceration, and again, I'm just going to mention something, it's not part of this panel, but one of the biggest problems of this mass incarceration issue is reentry. They come out of prison and they go right back into prison because there's no system that gives them a normal type of a lifestyle when they come out. They don't have a license. They can't have a bank account. They're not employable, because that scarlet letter keeps walking with them for the rest of their life. This is not where you go to prison, you pay your price, and you come out, you're a free person. You go to prison, you pay your price, and you continue to pay your price. So again, there are ancillary aspects that all affect this matter in a very significant way. And I think that beyond this statement that you're talking about and that is important, is the activity that needs to happen on a practical level, interactive activity. Not just identifying that it's something that we're interested in, something that's at a center point. It's something that you need to get out and do something about, and to talk to the right people at the right time, immediately, ASAP. And now is the time to do that.
So one of the questions in the question and
The
answer.
Lubavitch Rebbe always said.
So one of the questions in the Q&A panel is that one of the questions is basically, how do we reform a system that's founded on such values, racist values, and one that was never meant to be a place of rehabilitation or restoration? What about the idea of abolition that has emerged as people have started to think about, how do we really change a justice system that's so ill-founded? So that's one of the questions that's in the Q&A. Would anyone like to tackle that?
So one thing I do want to say is there's not a facet of American society not impacted by racism. I mean, just as they say, pashut, however you want to say it, it's real simple. And understanding that, as we begin to undo racism in our own society, we need to rethink every facet of society, whether it's healthcare disparities or it's the criminal justice system that needs to be rethought. So as we are looking at a system, abolishment, it's not my, as my granddaughter says, not my taste. What I'm saying is that we need to re-examine the roots, understand the roots, understand how it's playing out on a daily basis, both on a mega stage and on the very real stage of what happens within the context of the communities most affected, and rethink the process. But first, you got to get to the understanding that the issue of systemic racism can no longer be the standard by which we make decisions and by which we run our society, and being able to accept it. As I said before, the fact that the commissioner of the NYPD made that statement is mind-boggling. It's great. It's wonderful. It's moving the issue forward, and it's a total rethinking, refashioning of a legal system that needs to lead to justice, not just incarceration.
Any, Rabbi Barr, do you want to talk about the question about abolition?
Well, I wanted to talk about sort of what Rabbi Kaplan was going on. I want to take a jump on that, and I agree with what he said, but also, I mean, part of the reason we're doing this is we're talking about the values that we hold as Americans and how those values impact criminal justice, racism, all elements of our society. The way we're going to make changes is we have to understand the foundational values upon which things have been built. And what we need to do is put it out there where there have been mistakes, where systemic racism and has been sort of woven into it, and the idea of punishment has moved. It's no longer restorative justice, but it's simply punishment for punishment's sake. We need to start articulating, because we're seeing in other aspects, there's a bleed through of cruelty in America at this point, a sense that people can be cast aside. And I think what's happening with this statement and the conversation we're having is we're trying to put forward what values we hold, make it again part of the conversation, and then we're going to have to hold multiple institutions accountable to those values. Those institutions will include the policing practices, as Rabbi Lipskar said, the judicial system as well. Each one of them needs to be held to those. But first and foremost, we ourselves need to understand what values are most important to us and remember those sense of compassion and justice that we claim to hold and be willing to act on it. In part, I think the reason the Jewish community has been hesitant, we were afraid to raise our voices. We've been afraid to raise our voices on certain issues for fear that there will be backlash against us. And we've seen ourselves as far more part of society. We've grown more accustomed, and we feel like we're much more part of the majority versus having a minority status. And I think we didn't want to risk that. We didn't want to risk what people were going to say to us if we stood. We're always proud when somebody else marched a long time ago and society changed, but we're not willing to stand up right now for fear that if we do, we will be, cast aside or will be looked down upon. Change comes from those who are willing to stand up and take a risk. It does not come from those who are willing to sit back and be silent, because silence is, as is in the statement, akin to complicity. It's time not to be complicit any longer.
Yeah.
So the question,
Go ahead.
I'll just say quickly, I thank you, everybody. I'm inspired listening to my colleagues and mentors. I work with college kids, students, young men and women, for about 20 years almost now. And I would encourage us I sort of stand between generations. And I would encourage us to listen to what we care about and remember that this is about our values. And maybe defund, maybe abolish, maybe reinterpret, maybe restructure. These things are different models for living out values. And I don't want to evade the question by saying, oh, what should we, she's not saying what we should do. I don't know. But I do know as a rabbi that we shut our ears across our different constituencies because of trigger words and perceived naivete. And my hope is that a statement like this will help us align and remind ourselves of our alignment on our values. And then we will be able to talk without shutting each other out. And I really want to emphasize and underscore what Rabbi Barr just spoke about. Like, when we put our values in front of us, and that helps. And then we have to take those risks. And I think when we decide to do that together, it makes an enormous difference.
All right, thank you. So let's turn to the second question. And the second question here is, you know, how should we use this call to action? How should we use this platform to move forward the Jewish involvement and also commitment to reforming our justice system? So anyone want to tackle how they're planning to use this within their own work?
I can say on the micro level on my campus, which isn't so micro, I like to think anyway. A lot of students say, I don't know about Jewish, I don't know about theology, I don't know about ritual, all the things that I care about, they say, oh, I don't know if I care about it. But they will say, but I believe in Jewish values. And then I ask them, what are the Jewish values? And they say family and tikkun olam. Okay, these are good things. But I think that this is a teaching tool. For me, this could be, and I can see it very much so as a teaching tool, to both to talk about a Jewish value as a towards action, and that's a step in the process. That's one thing that I would certainly see me and colleagues like in my situation doing with this statement.
All right, thank you. Other comments?
So one of the things that we're going to be doing with the New York Coalition, Jewish Coalition on Criminal Justice Reform, is take this to another level of, as far as, and I want to really work very closely with the work that Trua has done and Jay Fridge has done and others have done. We want to collect up a compendium of Jewish sources, of Jewish statements around justice, and that will be across the board. That will include voices from every part of our community to make sure that everyone understands that this is part of the Jewish consciousness. I said in the chat that when we were liberated from Egypt, our bondage, we received the law as a pathway to create a just society as partners with the Borei Olam, the creator of everyone, the creator of everyone. And we have to understand that. So what this does is it lays down tracks for us. It gives us a beginning of an understanding that this is work that needs to be consistent and persistent within society. Dealing with both what happens with the local cop car that shows up in the local neighborhood, to the issue of the mass incarceration and the incredible injustice that are done within our legal system. It needs to all be seen. It needs to all be understood, and we need to be part of the process of fixing it.
Rabbi Barr or Lipskar, do you have other comments that you would like to talk about how you plan to use this call to action?
Well, as a congregational rabbi, I think
It's just great to know that there's a large group of commonality people that are interested in this matter and addressing this matter. So that's very encouraging already. As you say, you have 30 synagogues and organizations that are involved in that. But again, you know, for whoever is involved in the prison environment specifically, I would suggest that you look into that particular area and see how that can be changed, basically from the top down.
Mm-hmm.
Police can arrest a person for just for 1 night or 2 nights or 3 nights because of the quick, they have to get in front of a judge. That's where it takes place. It takes place in the courtrooms, not in the police stations. The police is a different problem, but that's not the incarceration issue that we're addressing here.
so.
Thank you. Rabbi Barr.
Yeah, so for me, I think as a congregational rabbi, I think the statement, and I think this is all of us, if we're involved in any community, whether it's a congregation or social organizations or social justice organizations, I think the statement
Also, as you can see, you know, in New Orleans and other places, you know, many of the environment.
Go ahead, Rabbi Barr, sorry.
Right.
Hi,
So-
I just wanted to come on just for 1 second. Rabbi Lipskar, can you just please make sure to hover over Faye and Robert's windows and make sure in that little volume icon in the top right, it says unmute audio. And if it says mute audio, please click on that for both of them so that you can hear both of them. Thanks.
And they still could not hear them for whatever reason. It's okay.
I'm gonna, thank you.
Go ahead, Rabbi Barr, sorry.
That's okay. But I think the statement becomes a vehicle to begin some conversations that may not have been had with both within the Jewish community and with other groups that we need to be in dialogue with. So I think it becomes a great opportunity, particularly for those folks who may not have been involved in the issue yet. Some of the people on this call have been involved in it for a very long time, but many have not been. And so for people who are just beginning that conversation, I think that the statement becomes a great opportunity and a jumping off place to begin, both for learning and for dialogue.
I love that language of laying down the tracks. And I would love to see us, as a writ large, discern a handful of specific issue areas within this vast mess of areas that our communities that we know that are most affected by this work and that have been doing it for a long time help us identify as where the Jewish community can be the most useful. There are so many issues. Where are the places that we can specifically be the most useful? That, for me, would be the next steps in a large kind of way.
Yeah, and I think too, there's both, there's the specificity of the criminal justice and what we do about that, but the fact is we also elect politicians. We as a Jewish community are involved in a lot of the conversation about what America should be, and this could be part of the conversation we could be having with the people we're electing, asking them about their feelings about it. We have members within our Jewish community who are judges, talking to them about their values. It's not like we're external to all this. We have a conversation that does exist where it's easy sometimes to make it, we're talking about an object separate from ourselves, but the fact is we know judges, we can talk to them. We know lawyers, we know people who are involved in the prosecutor's office. We may know people who are in the police force, and having conversations with them is also part of it. Sometimes you can make more progress there in those conversations, and I wouldn't want us to forget about that as well.
So what you're really suggesting is, we can use this call to action to basically help our members of our community, however we want to define it, but also to help others see how vital this is in terms of moving forward in our democratic values and our valuing individuals in society. So I do want to mention in the Q&A, Hank Kaplan has basically recommended that everyone see the documentary 13th. And that documentary is available through Netflix. I would highly recommend that documentary myself also, since it demonstrates many of the themes that our panelists have talked about today in terms of extreme punishment that we use, long sentences. Rabbi Lipskar has been helping us trying to really understand how inhumane and the cages are that we put people in, and how we really need to change the operations of justice. And 13th is one of the first documentaries that I'm aware of that really does that picture. It also something calls for an action. So in case people don't know, the 13th Amendment of the Constitution allows anyone who's been criminally convicted to have that second-class status. Question in my circles is currently, should we be changing the 13th Amendment? Should we begin to have a dialogue about that? So we have, and then Diana in the Q&A wants to know where to find the statement. If you go to the chat box, Diana, it's on the first part. And then Leslie asked us, what role can Teshuvah and restorative justice play in the bringing this issue to the center of Jewish discussion and concern? So does anyone want to talk about how we can move ourselves forward within our Jewish community to really help people understand the value of a different framework, transforming punishment into restorative justice?
So I think one of the ways to ask yourself as an individual leader in your community is, are you ready to do this? Are you ready to take this on as an issue? Are you ready to become educated on it, to bring that education? I learned from Rebbe a long time ago, the only way I can be good at teaching over to somebody else is if I can, the only way I really understand something is I can teach it over to somebody else. So I have to learn it enough inside of me. I have to make it part of my neshama to be able to be so well in depth, such a depth of understanding that I can bring it to others. So we got to ask our questions first of ourselves. What does that mean? And then we have to take all of our pieces, such of our Jewish knowledge, such as tshuva, and begin to understand, what does that mean outside? What does that mean for the generalized society? What does tshuva have to do with criminal justice? And we got to be able to ask ourselves that question. And if we can't answer it, we got to find teachers that can help us to understand that. So it's becoming part of the quote unquote movement and allowing ourselves to continue to grow and to see new challenges in front of us all the time. And as I said before, it's allowing either I'm ready or I'm not ready. And what does ready look like?
Yeah.
Now, our top 40 hits holidays, right? The high holidays, the high hos, focus on tshuva. Aseret Yemei Tshuva, right? When do Jews come to shul? We have a huge opportunity. I mean, it's built into every day of our davening if we really take it, but a look at it. But there are so many ways that we can use the issue of tshuva to center the issue of restorative justice. It's a matter of committing to it. It's a matter of learning. It's a matter of saying, this is how we're going to use this time because we've decided it's essential value. I must plug Trua's 180-page handbook on mass incarceration. We called it at the time transformation. It's educational. It gives Jewish values. It makes suggestions. Also, the JCPA toolkit is remarkable. So I agree. We need to commit to learn, commit to see the opportunities that are right in front of us, right in our neighborhoods, right in our Jewish calendar, and take a step.
So I did want to let everyone know who's attending this session that at 2:30 today, Bruce Turnbull will be hosting a panel discussion about federal policy. As we all know, we have some unique opportunities afforded us right now that has to do with putting in place this call to action. And one of that is some of the work that's actually being done on the Hill, Congressional Hill, that is, to really look at federal policy and practice. And JCPA works actively with a number of JCRCs around the country. And as Rachel has indicated, there's also a toolkit that's very helpful. So any last thoughts about from our panelists as we close up this session? For those of you looking in the chat box, I recommend there are a lot of good references to some good movies, documentaries that are available besides 13th. So last thoughts?
Are you also addressing a system for dealing with people that have committed crimes without the incarceration aspect?
So the call to action, looks at mass criminalization. So the concept of mass criminalization is essentially this notion that, it's not just about prisons, but it's actually about how we provide justice and how we handle problems in our society. So one thing that's happened over the last 45 years with the era of mass incarceration is we've criminalized more behaviors, and that has affected people's status in our society. 1 out of 5 American adults are have had some criminal justice experience. So, in reading the call to action, the notion is that we're ending mass incarceration, but we're also dealing with mass criminalization, mass supervision, and essentially the wrongful use of a justice system to solve society's problems. So I believe, yes, Rabbi Lipskar, that's part of the mission here. Any other last thoughts?
Again, put that out there. Ask yourself if you're ready to take this on. And what tools do you need to be able to meet the challenge? The handbook that's put out by Trua, the multiple out there, the work that's being done by Aleph, the work that's being done in individual synagogues, and what will that look like in your mission, in your Jewishness, and what will that look like in your Jewish community? And if you have questions, ask the folks that have been on the road for a while. They can tell you what it looks like and what you might run into. We're ready, willing, and able to do it. My road is a little shorter than some of the other folks on this webinar, and however, ready, willing, and able to share.
Yes. Go ahead, Rabbi.
And when you have a win, there's nothing like it. You know, there's nothing like it. When you have a win on a personal level with someone who's encountering the system and your community, when a law changes, when something happens, there's nothing like it. And we should just remember that this is a feeling of crossing the sea as well. And we should be there together.
All right, well, we're at the end of our hour. I want to thank our panelists. I'm sorry to our listeners and to the panelists for any of the technical issues. It's kind of the frustrating part of the way we do work these days, but we shall overcome, as they say. So thank you very much. And I hope everyone takes a look at the call to action, signs on to it, and within your own community, you work on those particular issues. Thank you again, everyone.